we're in a very collective area of healing, right? And as a group, we are a collective, and we have various levels of collective, our own collective nature. We have our microbiome, which is a big collective in the body, and that's at a very physical level. We have the state of the causal physiology. And for those who are new to energy healing and new to the terms that I use, the idea of the causal body is the deepest manifest level of self, the manifested self closest to the unmanifest source of creation. So we've got unmanifest source of creation, and then the beginnings of manifestation, right? And then more concrete, more concrete, more concrete, and eventually physical, very solid, you can see it, you can touch it, level of the physiology. So we've got that range there, and that very fine level, that causal level of the physiology, we also can think of as the finest level of feeling. We understand it as feeling, but it is not defined in space-time the way the body is defined in space-time. It's very unbounded, but it's still part of each one of us. It's still part of you. It is you. But it spreads out. It's outside the range of space and time. So it's as old as the universe and as big as the universe. And it contains all the other beings in creation with it. So that makes it like, that's a very collective level of self, right? Okay. So that's another level of our collective. There's another level of collective self, and that would be our ancestry. And our ancestry is kind of interesting because it ranges from the gross, superficial, solid, manifest level of being, because it actually resides at the level of the DNA. So that's physical, measurable, identifiable. But also the archive of the ancestors, although having kind of like a physical home in the body and the DNA, it also has a very abstract, its reality ranges all the way down to that causal level, that very fine level. Each one of us can identify the energetic structure of the ancestral body as the feeling of the family. It's the feeling of family. It's your family. It's your family. And each one of us has our immediate family, who we identify as separate from everybody else's immediate family. But if we go far enough back in time, our families start to overlap in a big way. For anybody of European descent, just a couple of centuries, and we have lots of common ancestors. And for those who are not of European descent, going back into all the other races of people on Earth, just a few more centuries, and we're all related. So that level of self has both a sort of highly defined reality, and then also a very abstract, much more broad-based reality. Okay, so these three collective levels of self. Why am I mentioning them? Because it occurred to me that it would be useful to do some healing for that part of our being, to create a foundation for the most powerful quality or level of healing that we can create through these live webinars. Because what I realize is that each of us brings our individuality to the live webinars, but we also bring our collectives to the webinars. We also bring our family. And the family comes in the form of all those foundational beliefs and thought patterns and structures and habits that have been passed down from generation to generation that form a foundation for the way we manifest ourselves, including like hair color and eye color and everything. So what occurs to me is that if I'm just putting my attention on the DNA, on the family structure for everyone. So your family's basically with you in the level of consciousness all the time, and promote a level of orderliness in that structure, harmony and orderliness in that structure, then each one of us as healers becomes a more powerful healer. Because when we do our work in these webinars and even on our own, we're doing it with the support of the family. So, hi. Earth is a living entity. I have the feeling Earth is excited about what we are doing, yes, and eager to hear what she has to say as we proceed today. Thank you for that coming in the chat window from one of the great healers who's in on this session. Earth is the mother of all the families, isn't she? I love giving you the inside details of what's going on deep inside me when the healing is going on. So this is what's happening. I shift my attention to the awareness of family in each person who's in this live webinar. And that means gross senses of perception going down into the molecular level. That means pure perception or awareness going down into the home, the universal home of the archive of the ancestors, each person's archive. And then dropping my awareness into the field of unmanifest being. And the first thing I'm feeling is a feeling of great honor, because reverence and honor, because those individuals who had the resources and the good fortune, who had the capacity to produce offspring and to create this world of humans as we are now, those individuals have an honorable place in the history of humanity. They're the ones who reproduced. That's a big deal. So that's the first thing. The second thing is looks like the creation of a sacred space in the causal level of the field of self, which I would say it's like a sacred garden of the heart for the whole family. So we're looking into the sacred gardens of the heart for the family. And in each of those places, there's a quality is a restructuring of the shape and form of that sacred space in order to align with Dharma. So we're looking at any walls or any barriers or any boundaries that might be in that sacred space of the family that are not allowing consciousness to flow forward in an evolutionary progressive manner. So we're looking at those directly, and I can see them. And as I'm looking at them, what's happening is there's a quality of light which emanates or radiates from the center of those sacred spaces, the center of the ancestral archive. We can call it the ancestral archive, or we can call it the sacred garden of the heart for your family. Either term means basically the same thing, but from the center of that space is establishing. I love that word, establishing. It's establishing a connection with tradition, honorable tradition and a reverence for not just human tradition, but cosmic tradition, cosmic family traditions. Tradition in a, you could say, like a original template for what that means, for the meaning of this concept of the honor of a family, nobility and trust, honesty. It's beautiful. And that light also has a feminine softness in it, which is creating a gentleness. It feels like it's softening down a lot of the family beliefs that were kind of like cliquish or clan-ish over the centuries, like, oh yeah, our family's good, but that other family over there, forget them, because you go back far enough, it's just all the same family anyway, right? So there's a kind of a softness here that is recognizing the more universal form of what family tradition and family honor means across all the family lines, across all of them, so that there's a sort of held in common. There's this kind of commonly, I would say then, a commonly held thread of understanding of what that means, and that it is a universal form. So recognized as a universal form. So recognition, awakening of recognition, that means awakening taking place in the DNA, taking place in the sacred center, the sacred garden of the family archive. And as that awakening occurs, what happens is the members of the family, going back many, 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 many generations, are waking up to their own potential to work together with us in the energy healing field. So we're conjoined, we start to work together, orderly, in an orderly fashion. There is such beautiful intelligence awakening, such beautiful discrimination awakening within the family structure. I want to give this a description because it's my job. That's why I'm on camera and you're not, is because I'm describing it. But I'm telling you something. This intelligence, it's so beautiful. It's like I'm trying to give it words. It's outside the range of my basic language capabilities, but that doesn't matter, because this is all about me stretching a little bit too, right? It's the joy of doing this with you, is the little stretch that I get to. It's an intelligence that is an integrated marriage of the three basic energy centers of the body. So head, heart, and gut, those three areas. Those are three important, like distinctly different ways. These three areas have three distinctly different ways of perceiving and understanding reality. So this particular quality of intelligence is balancing and organizing the coordinated effort between these three areas. This is happening for everybody in our healing circle, but it's also happening for the families. It's also happening for the ancestors. Some of them are understanding it through music. Some of them are let's see, they're processing the experience of the integration of this intelligence as they listen to music. Because a lot of times music has these three areas. It's got like a bass line, which establishes a fundamental for all the chords. And then there's the melody, which tends to ride on top. And then there's like a sort of a harmony section in the middle. So there are these three parts. And I'm finding that it's interesting that music is a universal, right? It goes back as far and as long. I mean, the birds make music, that even before we had fingers, we were making music. So the whales make music, all the beings, all the universe, all the planets make music. And I think that's important. It actually, I feel as if this ties in a little bit with the point that just came up about Mother Earth getting excited about the sort of healing structure that we're building right now in our healing webinar in order to affect some kind of support for her efforts as well. Because as we know, the planets are also quite musical. As they spin on their axes, they produce different pitches, different tones, and as they move around the sun, their movement around the sun creates different pitches and tones, and all those pitches and tones have relationships with each other, and it's the relationships that are responsible for the way the relative level of creation manifests. The tones, as they exist at that very, very subtle level of creation, that causal level, it's very abstract. But then if there's a tone here and then there's another tone here, they produce waves that create a relationship, and it's the relationship that creates the scaffolding, that creates like threads, the threads that we think of as the features of the astral level of creation. And those are what give rise to the foundation for like thoughts and beliefs and desires and intentions, and all the thoughts, beliefs, desires, and intentions then form the scaffolding for our behaviors and what we do in our life and what we create and so forth. Even things like the way the body changes and stuff, everything, you know, I can say, well, this hair was when I had to to get up in the middle of my meal and take somebody somewhere. This is when the phone rang when I was eating lunch, and this gray hair over here. Now, anyway, you know, each little thing that we create ourselves, you know. All right. So that's the healing for the families. And what this does is it brings the best qualities of every family member into a coordinated wholeness with your own being, so that whatever your intentions, desires, thoughts, habits, feelings, whatever you're creating or promoting, it has behind it sort of like the backing of the family. Because we know all of us have different situations and circumstances with our families, and some people's family members are supportive of what they're doing, some people's family members are not. And what we need to do for this healing is to be able to bring everybody together in a place of safety and comfort and wholeness, so that everybody can still support the overall effect. Even if you have a family member who has problems or who is dysfunctional or whatever, it doesn't matter, because even a dysfunctional person can still help promote an evolutionary effect. It's just a little shift. It's a little shift. It's a little shift. And I'm just feeling that as it's being understood by the physiology in the form of a light, or as in the form of the relationship between the causal structures that produce it. It's a very high energy frequency, and it's responsible for holding your family in an embrace of security and evolutionary alignment, so that regardless of people's functionality, regardless of people's nature, regardless of details and habits or anything, that everybody stays in that soft space that allows them to move forward on their evolutionary track. I do this with my family. I've been doing this with my family for years and years, and it's such an incredible pleasure for me to share it with your families, our big Earth family. Thank you. All right. So let's look to Mother Earth a little bit. This is where things get interesting. There's so many, you know, during the weeks before the build-up, before the webinar, I'm always kind of working on the topic, and there were so many things. Oh, come. There's seats. Come and sit, sweetheart. There's so many different areas in the story of our whole world that are areas of concern, you know. So like, if this is a healing for Mother Earth, where do we start? And as I thought about it, the idea that came to me, I was thinking, well, what's the deepest thing? Like, we're always looking for the seed, right? We do this in energy healing. This is very common. Oh, there's a symptom on the surface. Well, what's behind it? Where is the seed? Where's the nut? Where's the source of that symptom? And then can we go to the source and take it out by its source? And so we can look at the surface of the earth and we can say, well, you know, there's civil war going on over here, and there's some kind of political corruption going over here, and there's some kind of earth changes, which are, was there just a big earthquake in South America? Oh, Japan. Okay, Japan too. I hadn't heard about that one actually, but I thought I saw something in South America somewhere. Anyway, so there are things going on all the surface. It's bubbling. There's something bubbling up to the surface, but if we follow each one back to the source, back to that, where do we find that deepest, most fundamental structure that would allow suffering to be, would allow suffering to exist on the earth? There's, as you go back, it gets simpler, right? There's all these effects on the surface, but you keep following back, kind of like a family. Eventually there's like a common ancestor or something. And one of the things that came up to me, which I had never considered before, when I asked into the field of silence, my silent source, was that a field of discourse is produced by at the moment of death, particularly. Now we know, right, so one point coming up here is that Maharishi says that stresses of the individuals build to the point where they explode into wars, right? And so what I'm saying is like a little bit like utilizing that principle. He says avert the danger, which is not yet come, but what I'm saying is whenever a person gets overwhelmed, then what happens is they can only, before we become overwhelmed with our stresses, when we're kind of dealing with them, we're dealing with them and dealing with them, but there comes a point when we get overwhelmed by them. And when we get overwhelmed by them, what we tend to do, this is the natural tendency, is to kind of release them out into the environment. Kind of just let them, it's like, okay, that was too much. I'm just going to let that go. And it reminds me, as I was looking at it, it was reminding me a little bit of a flower, or say a weed in the garden, and it makes a flower. And then there's this point where it releases all, it can't hold on to its seeds anymore. It lets them go, and they float around the garden, and they start planting themselves in that, whatever was the initial intelligence of that flower, it multiplies itself. And karma is like that, right? Karma is the underlying structure that's behind the experiences and the perceptions that are uncomfortable. And karma sits down at the causal level of being. So you've got a karma down there, like a wall, creating a kind of a space, which is creating a hum, which is not harmonious with your evolutionary process. So we've got a space which is making a kind of a, like an uncomfortable sound. And the effect rises to the surface. If we're folding awareness back into the causal level and we're saying, okay, I'm going to take that out by its seed. I have a weed in the garden. Well, should I remove it from its root? Or should I just let it grow until it spreads its seeds everywhere? So if we can avert the danger, which has not yet come, we can go in when we see that weed growing, we can go into the root and remove the source of it. But if we don't do that soon enough, we end up with a problem at the surface. And when we end up with a problem at the surface, that can expand and create an overwhelmed experience for the individual. And when that happens, what we usually do is we kind of say, it's like we say, God, this is too much for me. I can't deal with it. So I'm just going to let it go out and do its thing. And what that does is it creates many more seeds of karma. Many more seeds of karma. So it causes that karma to multiply itself, and then the reflection comes back from each place of the universe where that it was overwhelming, so I sent it out there kind of effect. Okay. So at the time of death, the premise is, thank you, dear, is that the karma overwhelms the physiology. This is the mechanic. At the time of death, the karma overwhelms the physiology. So what we have is we have people leaving their bodies all the time and being in that state where the karma has overwhelmed their physiology, and they're just like, okay, this is too much, I'm just letting go. So we have that, For humans, we have 8 billion people on Earth, so we can imagine there are probably quite a number of people who are leaving their bodies all the time. But we also have, as I mentioned last time, 70 billion animals in captivity who are going through very fast cycles of their life and death because they're being raised for food production. So these animals also are like constantly and they're leaving in very uncomfortable conditions. You know, it's not just like somebody who lives a graceful long life and at the end of their fulfilled life with all their family around them, everyone gathers to say goodbye. No, it's not like that for them. It's like they are these beautiful beings that have come to this earth, and they are raised in ungodly conditions, and they are killed in heartless ways, and it produces a lot of stress, and it far outnumbers. So if there's 70 billion, these are every season, every harvesting season, these experiences are going into our collective. And that's creating a kind of an underlayment or a bed of energy in which the entire human family resides. And it's, you know, so that's what I was looking at. I was like, you know, what could be like a basic structure that's in there that may be promoting destructive laws of nature, or promoting nature to sort of sometimes favoring suffering, which in Kali Yuga, you know, favors suffering. So I'm just offering that explosion or expansion of the suffering of all those who are leaving their earthly existence as it goes into the field of our collective reality. And I'm just looking at it, and you have to understand, you guys, I mean, I looked at this earlier in the weeks because I was considering what we're doing here, and it's huge. It's huge. I can't see it all by myself. I waited till I was with you guys because we each have our little perspective. So it's like having many eyes, like having the eye of a bee, right? There are like 100 people on this webinar. And so it's got 100 points of perspective on this thing. So we can really see what it really looks like. And here's what I'm feeling, because I'm offering my perspective with everyone's perspective into the field of being. And what it's doing is it's bringing forth a tidal wave of compassion, a tidal wave of recognition. It's not just compassion, because we know that in this time of the world history, compassion isn't a sturdy enough leg to stand on. We can't put our full weight on the quality of compassion without it crumbling underneath us. That truth is the only leg that stands. So we have to couple the compassion with the truth. We have to couple them together. So that's happening right now, is a coupling. And here's my question to being, to nature, because this is nature is bringing up this wave of compassion. The other two legs are the leg of cleanliness and the leg of austerity, tapas. And so, is truth strong enough? Is it stable enough to uphold all four legs, all the three other legs that can't necessarily stand on their own? If it's strong enough, can we bring all four legs together so that it upholds, so that it stands steady as this impulse, which is being produced by our collective? It's really coming from the field of unmanifest being. It's coming from the source of creation. And each one of us in our healing collective is being a single channel or a single thread. It's like a beam through which that light is emanating. I'm feeling an integration of the truth with the other three values. I see something very interesting. So if we look at this underlayment of, we could call it stress, that sits in the collective consciousness. It's based on the way in which so many beings are losing their lives at this time, at the expense of, like almost 10 times as many beings are losing their lives at the expense of humanity's meat consumption. And that's just one example. But anyway, as I'm looking at that, what I'm seeing is that compassion alone doesn't make an effective change in the situation. It is only when it's coupled together, particularly with truth, that we get an impulse that's very highly discriminating and intelligent rising from our collective into the field of our world to support. So I'm just watching the support moving through our collective. Each one of us is like a point of production for that energy, for that formula of consciousness, that medicine of consciousness to fold into the collective field of consciousness. I'm seeing 2, 3, 4 different things happening at once. One thing is that places on Earth where large numbers of beings lose their lives in a highly uncomfortable manner, in those areas, the Davic intelligence of nature is having a little trouble processing the experience. So it is Earth's nature to help create some balance and to cleanse. Earth naturally cleanses herself with rains and winds and Earth changes and things like that. So that naturally happening. But there are in some places where that has happened, and I would like to just insert this point here that I've been doing some healing for a country, one of the dear countries of our Earth, where there was recently a genocide, particularly in a particular area, particular city in that country where the most number of people were killed. They were just like animals in captivity. They were just herded into an area and they were all killed. And it was a lot of people. And so I was noticing how the Davic intelligence of the Earth in that area looked almost like it was suffering some kind of inflammation. It happens that the city was like kind of in a valley between some mountains, right? So there was a natural naga that ran through that valley. There was a natural earth, like a snake-like earth form that ran down under the earth between the mountains in that valley, and that it should be those forms, those snake-like forms, those earth devas should be very sort of sleek and smooth, but in this particular area it wasn't looking that way at all. There's too much heat building up in that naga. There was it was looking kind of like not sleek and smooth, but kind of bumpy and sort of inflamed and uncomfortable. And then it occurred to me that that's happening in other places, and a lot of the locations where meat packing plants are, at least like locally, we have one in Attuned. It's right next to the river. It's like right next to the river. So you've got the naga of the river who's knows its responsibility is to support the purification for all the beings in that area. And then you've got this building there where thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of animals are processed through that building. And it becomes too much. And then is anybody surprised that Ottumwa is the meth capital of Iowa? Why? Because the naga that's supposed to be keeping the city pure, that could be keeping the city pure, should be keeping the city pure. It's overwhelmed. The naga is overwhelmed. So we have this quality of overwhelm which is giving rise to this discord in the collective field in which we're all living. And it's causing an overwhelm to go into the earth as well. So a lot of the earth's intelligence, which are responsible for maintaining balance and helping us not to get overwhelmed, are also feeling overwhelmed. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so the opposite, the antithesis of being overwhelmed is lack, right? Like overwhelmed is too much. You've got too much of something. So it's like weighed down, and on the other side, not enough of something. So that's the balance point. So let's see if we can offer that complementary pairs of opposites into the field of being, into the source of creation, as the beginnings of perhaps a solution for this underlayment of stress that sits in the collective consciousness of our world. So I'm just doing that, going into the silence. Okay. So it doesn't look like it's completely formed, but it's formed enough I can speak it. Having not as much as you need would be categorized as austerity. So that's that quality of austerity. But as we pointed out before, austerity can be out of balance, so it needs the support of truth. So when it's supported by truth, we come into a quality that's more like simplicity. More like simplicity. Like, it's not like depravity, it's not like depriving oneself, but it's more like just being very, very simple. So that, and simple is beautiful and efficient. Simple is beautiful and efficient. So what I'm seeing rising from the field of the source of creation and coming up first into the causal level of creation is a form of simplicity which could be identified as an ideal form or a cosmic form of simplicity. We could think of a template or an archetypal form of simplicity. Like what was that? The Spartans or something, you know, they just lived simply, very, very simply. It's an archetype of simplicity. And with this form, which is stabilizing in the causal field of creation, and this is happening, I just need to double check where it's happening. So our whole group is sort of holding, it seems to be forming in the center of our collective, our healing collective. But remember, our healing collective isn't just like you and me and you and you and you. It's my family and your family and your family, and it's us as a collective. Okay, so it's forming in the center of this collective of our collective. And with it, I'm seeing that as the simplicity rises out to the field of the web of life and the whole collective field of creation, then it reflects back from the collective field of creation back to us. And as it does so, it comes with a feeling of liberation, lightness, release. You know, when we go from a more overwhelmed condition to a more simple condition, there's that, oh, now I don't have to carry that burden anymore, right? So this is how it's reflecting back in. So that reflection back into our healing circle can be through us, because we're smarty pants, okay? It can be offered back to the source of creation. That feeling of, oh, liberation, oh, release, oh, I feel so much lighter. I feel so much more, so much less burdened. So that's like the gift, because the Absolute gave us the gift of this simplicity, then we're able to offer it back with this added value of relief and release. And with that, I'm also feeling compassion arising again, because this time the compassion is coming with a kind of recognition, which would be a truth form, right? Because recognition, acknowledgement, perception, these are all kind of like facets of truth. And so there's recognition coming with the compassion. And what it feels like is happening right now is that divinity in its purest form has sort of grabbed up this process that we created in our healing collective and is sort of running with it on its own. Like divinity is like, oh, I think I got this. It's as if there's a kind of awakening occurring at the level of the divine, at the level of the source of creation. There's a sort of added level of source awakening to its own nature and to its own capabilities in a way had not before. I personally feel that the reason that's happening is that this healing that we just did was very sophisticated. I don't know if anybody on earth anywhere else has done a healing quite like this one. And so the level of being, which is responsible for everything that manifests in creation, is like, hey, I just did something new. We just did something new and different, like something cool and useful, and which has the potential to support life in a way that wasn't previous, like a new tool or something, right? A new technology. I was saying earlier, my mother found a technology to help her eyesight. She's 90, and she went to the doctor yesterday. And he said, your sight's better than last time. Your macular degeneration isn't degenerating anymore. And she's like, hallelujah. So it's like that. There's a hallelujah going on right now. A hallelujah based on the fact that even though the truth is the only stable leg, truth is the only stable of the legs of Dharma, it can be wielded in such a way, it can support the other three in such a way that the other three legs will function as if they are unbroken, as if they are stable. The legs of Dharma, all of them. Because what truth brings is it brings that discrimination of just how far and how much weight you can put on the other legs and still maintain stability. But what's happening, see, this is the abstract bit that I wasn't verbalizing just before, but now I can, is that it's the ability to heal with energy healing and to utilize the structures of Dharma. What we're really doing is we're going into areas where there's karma, right, which creates stable forms, but it blocks the flow of consciousness. And we're integrating dharmic elements in order to restructure or transform that karma into Dharma. So you still have a wall that holds up your house, it holds up your ceiling, but instead of it being a dense wall that blocks the flow of life, it becomes kind of like a translucent wall, or a wall that lets the light shine through. It's folding into its own nature. That's what I was going to say. When the divine picked it up, it said, well, I can fold, I can use this principle on its own self. Okay, so if truth can combine with compassion and austerity and cleanliness in such a way that they can function as if they're stable, then can I take this premise and fold it in on the qualities of Dharma itself and heal Dharma deeply, fully, all the way to its foundation? That would be a mechanic that would bring in the age of enlightenment, that would bring in Sat Yuga in the time of Kali Yuga, which we're in. For those who are new to those verbal concepts or those terms, there are different times or epochs in the history of the universe. We share with other planets, we share with other galaxies. There are these different times. And in the time that we're in, this Kali Yuga time, dominates more of the destructive laws of nature. So we experience that as at the surface of life. If you look out and you read the newspaper and all that, that there are certain kinds of sufferings that go on, and that the suffering is allowed to even happen, or war is even allowed to happen. The longer periods, Sat Yuga, wars don't happen. People function in a more harmonious fashion, and everything in creation functions in a more harmonious fashion. I'm seeing something else happening here. And that is that one of the features or qualities of Sat Yuga, the time when everything is more harmonious, is that there's a lot more integration between the individual and the environment. Really a lot more. And so that is the effect that's bubbling up to the surface for us as individuals and for us as families. Better integration of connection with the environment. It does several things. It allows useful information to reach you in forms that you can recognize. So when the universe wants you to do something, it's not foggy or fuzzy or unclear. It's clear. That's one thing. The other thing, and this is a kind of a delicate thing, like I'm kind of questioning it as I'm seeing it rising up, is that our internal structures are a little more revealed at the surface, like we see them. So if you have, say, a belief or a thought or an idea, it may not remain hidden inside you as much or as long. So you may, what's I'm seeing happening is a tendency for truth, your essential truth, to kind of come out to the surface a little more efficiently. And that has its pluses and minuses, right? Because in social settings, you know, sometimes we might have a thought like, oh, that person's an idiot, or, you know, I don't know. I mean, things, but then you think, well, I'm far too polite to say that, so I won't say that. But then if this integration happens, what'll happen is that if that thought or impulse is there, it might somehow wiggle out to the surface somehow. So we have to think in terms of becoming more adaptable. We need to support everyone's ability to become adaptable, to being comfortable with our own essential truth, being a little more present, a little more on the surface. It's a funny thought, isn't it? Could you imagine if everything who's that, J.P. Sears or something, right? He's like, these are the thoughts that awakened people have, and then it'll be like all these like terrible thoughts or something. I'm more enlightened than the next guy or something like that, whatever. So, yeah, right. I'm so humble. I'm so modest. That's right. So, yeah. So it's good to have that as a feature, but it also puts a kind of a little pressure or responsibility on each of us to be also, number one, much more forgiving of ourselves and others, right? Because as stuff bubbles up, we need to be quickly, oh, that's something, okay, well, then I can adjust for that, you know? Oh, maybe that was a wrong belief. Okay, fine, it's out, new one in, I'm good. You know, kind of like that. No, none of this like, oh, I was a bad person because I had that belief. No, none of that. It's just like, okay, I see it. Okay, now we move on. And that's really, really important for the families. It's especially important for family members who've been having some difficulty getting themselves aligned with their own evolutionary process, who've been in some kind of like destructive cycles or loops of behavior that don't seem to allow them to move forward. For those guys, this is especially important, that an element of adaptability. So what's happening is our causal bodies are rising up to support the process by producing and promoting the energy frequency or the energy quality of adaptability. And it's very simple. I love the fact that that simplicity that we created as a collective and we gave out to our environment is now coming back to us from lots and lots and lots of different directions. And it's going to be super useful for lots of different healing work that we want to do ourselves personally. And here's a perfect example. We want adaptability, and one of the keys is for simplicity. So the quality of simplicity is already, it's become money in your bank. It was produced by us as a healing collective, and it's gone out to the creation. And now it becomes something that's ever accessible, basically. So in order to adapt quickly, it's good to have lots of don't want to get too complicated if you have to adapt quickly, right? You just want to be simple. It's like, there it is. Okay, I'm there. I'm moving on. Like, very simple, very simple. It's beautiful. Good job, everybody. I like that. Okay, I promised I would take questions, and we have questions. We have a few questions, so let's look at these. Here's one that came from the group here. Asking the laws of nature that have been asleep, that create balance in the environment to wake up now. I love that. Yes. So, you know, what I love about this question is that it approaches our healing work not from a level of us as individual humans doing the work for ourselves individually, but really working directly with nature, with the laws of nature, to support a healing for nature itself. And as I promised I would, isn't that a cute little note? It's as I promised I would save the questions to the end. But what happened was this question came up a little earlier in our session, just before we did a healing that actually caused an awakening of nature, of natural law. So even though I only read the question now, I guess on some intuitive level, I must have known what was in the, yeah, it was just happening. It was happening. So thank you. I love our synchronicity. I love the fact that we're so connected like that. That was beautiful. All right, so we've got some more questions too. But we can do, I'm sure there are many other ways also for nature to wake up. The theme of family is running through our webinar for sure. Can the planets and Mother Earth's other family members help her with healing? That is such a beautiful question. I love that. And let me tell you, this lovely lady from Canada who just asked this question, what I love about your question is that this question was asked by somebody who's an expert in the planets. So it's sort of interesting. There's sort of a synchronous thread from the one question to the next question, which I'm enjoying, because it's like we're seeing how the work that we've done in this healing session is already popping up to the surface, right? Did I not say that there would be more synchronicity? Did I not say? Yes, and there it is, boom. So displayed without even planning, it happens. I love it, it's wonderful. Okay, so yes, so Mother Earth also has a family, and of course our sun is a star, and it also has a family, right? Like the star, which is our sun, originated in one of those nebula, right? Nebula are kind of like the baby formation, the nurseries of stars, and so it has its brother and sister stars and so forth. So there are layers of family We can say they're layers of family that go out and out and out into the whole universe. And they're also, I guess I would imagine, they're layers of family that somehow go in as well, right? Because we have like the family structures of our microbiome, for example, or families of cells in the body, or families of causal structures that are like related to each other, right? So we've got the big, ginormous causal field. And each one of us, like Dorothy kind of divides her causal field up this way. She's got this piece of karma and these dharmas, and she likes a healthy boundary right there, another healthy boundary right there, that kind of thing. Like we each have our own way of dividing up our causal fields, but there are families of divisions. And we'll go to the Earth and her planets and support for the healing of Mother Earth, because we do need to. I said I was going to look at the climate, right? So I hadn't done that, but I really also want to explore this thing with the causal, because that's like way right at the forefront of some of the most abstract and most interesting work that I feel has been coming up over the last couple of weeks as I was preparing for this webinar. And I was, I watch stuff bubble up to the surface and I'm like, well, that's an interesting little experience and piece of information. I wonder how that's going to tie into the webinar and so forth. And one of those points that came up was the concept of archetypes, which are sort of universal but subtle structures that we all hold in common, right? The archetype of the beneficent king, and the archetype of the warrior, and the archetype of the savior, and the archetype of the victim, and there's so many different ones. And so I feel as if there's a lot to be explored there, but since we don't have very many minutes left, and another question just came in, I want to see what we can do for Earth right now on the foundation or on the basis of her relationship with her family members. So as I go into the field of my own infinite silence, what I see is that the entire family of relationships in our solar system is administrated by the sun. It's orchestrated by the sun. So really, in order to support and promote best harmony within the context of the solar system family, we go to the sun. That's like the source point. The sun knows a very old story about the history of the planets. And the sun, from my perspective, and what I'm doing right now is awareness in the field of pure silence. Then it goes to the sun, and it's just kind of like seeing what the sun sees. And what I'm experiencing is that the sun is really very stabilized in its ability to perceive the story of its own history and the story of the solar system from a timeless perspective. Also a time perspective. This moment, the sun knows where it is this moment, but it also knows the whole history, both the past and the future. And it sees how the different influences work together throughout the course of galactic history, the course of universal history. There's an underlayment of incredible love, devotion, dedication, truth, There's a resilience, which we don't necessarily, as humans, have our radars attuned to, but it's there. There's a natural resilience in the solar system, in the planets, in our Earth. There's a level of resilience that's able to activate and come into play outside the constraints or the activities that are promoted by humanity. There's also a recognition of incredible beauty in each of the planets, an incredible appreciation. There's a recognition, honoring of the life qualities in the different planets. We think, oh, well, we're the only planet that's got living things on it because we're made of flesh. But the fact is that the whole field of creation is just teeming. It's just rife with life. Even this piece of air right here is full of life. Every bit of everything is full of life. And just because Jupiter is a gaseous planet doesn't mean there isn't anything living there. It just means that what's living there is more gaseous, that's all. It just isn't fleshy. But it doesn't mean it's dead, you know? So all the planets are rife with life. And in the subtlest forms of life that are made of space can exist in pretty much any conditions, under any conditions, in any temperatures, in any mix of minerals or mix of elements, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of life. There's a lot of life around us. Not all of it like interfaces very well. We're not that integrated. I would say as a planet and as a people, we're not that integrated with our neighbors, you know, with the qualities of life that are on Jupiter or Saturn or some moons or whatever, the sun. You know, we're only just starting. In some of our webinars, we've worked with the life force from the sun, because there are forms of life there, fiery type of forms of life, which our eyes are capable of interfacing the photons. Electromagnetic energies, our eyes and our ears, our senses of perception can interface with electromagnetic energy. And those life forms are basically comprised of electromagnetic energy. So there's some interaction there, but there's not a lot of recognition or honoring or reverence. So, but that's okay. We're working on it. Our healings help. Here's another question. We're just at our hour, but we'll see if we can do one more question. Can we do a healing for the oceans, mother of us all? I know. Everybody's heart's just like, oh my God. That is affected by global climate change. Yeah, I'd like to just add a little point, you know, based on the information that was brought up by our friends who are doing all the research. One of the things that's happened is there's been a lot of measuring of temperatures on Earth, and you know, people are saying, oh, you know, global warming, but then if we look at the seasons, like here in Iowa, you know, the seasons were not so unusually hot. You know, right now it's September. It's about the temperature we would expect it to be in September right now in Iowa. So is the temperature really rising? It turns out that if you take measurements on the land and you make a little graph, the temperatures are rising a little bit. But if you take measurements in the oceans, the temperatures in the oceans are rising a lot. So what that means is that the waters are absorbing a lot of the increase in temperature that's being caused by global warming. So those of us who live on the land aren't necessarily seeing that rise in temperature so much. That kind of creates a little bit of an illusion, you know, for those who would like to believe that there's no global warming. They can say, well, it's, you know, it was about 66 degrees today. That's what it's supposed to be in September in Iowa. Yeah, I know, right? The polar bears don't have any more ice to walk on. So we're out of time. And I do feel like this is a very big topic. So I think what I'd like to do in order to honor everybody's time is I'd like to start out tomorrow's session working with this question, because it's so potent and it has so much value in it. I want to do it justice. And, we could certainly just do like a little silent healing. And I would like to offer to our healing collective that as we finish off today's webinar, we can all in our hearts take this question with us into our sleep time and our dream time, and each of us offer whatever we can into this healing. And then tomorrow we'll come back together again. A lot of us will still be together tomorrow, so we can come, and those of you who won't be with me will get the recording, so we'll still be together. And we'll take a look at the oceans, because I do feel that they deserve a good block of our attention and time and care to do a healing that will be really significant and really useful. Thank you, my dears, from our friends in California who live by the oceans. Appreciate it very much. Okay, so we'll start out tomorrow with that one. I hope you guys can join me from California. And I love you all very much. And I'm just so grateful for tonight's time together. And I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. So we will continue on where we left off today and continue doing these potent healings for the well-being of every living thing. Thank you all so much for being with me. See you again soon. Bye.